Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert McFarland. Over the next several episodes, guys, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 2025 municipal elections. Mayors and city council members from all over Southern Utah are going to be seeking your vote in helping shape the future of our cities. So this is the place that you're going to be able to get one-on-one conversations with all the candidates to help you make the best decision for you come election season. So please make sure you like and subscribe, share it with other voters throughout Washington County, and make sure they have the information they need to make the decisions that are going to be best for us in the county. We hope you enjoy this episode and this series of episodes, guys. We'll see you out there.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
Shane Losee, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, you're kind of familiar with the episodes and the podcast. You kind of know what we're doing here, but you're running for city council, right?
Yeah, that's correct. St. George City Council. And yeah, I've really enjoyed the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any favorite episodes?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the sheriff and the chief.
Yeah.
I thought those two, Whitehead and Brooksby were awesome. I thought that was a great episode.
Yeah.
Really enlightened me to some of the, the community getting behind them, as well as some of the issues that they face.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. But all of them, and the ones that I've listened to, have been quite good.
Yeah, my father-in-law, he's a detective, and he's like, yeah, he's a classic chief. He doesn't have a. He's not as much of an open book, right? He's like calculating what he says. He's short, straight to the point, which I appreciate. He seems like a really level-headed guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, especially in public safety. Those are good attributes, right?
And then I think it's awesome that Brooksby's kind of like a little bit of a wild gun. He has that kind of like a typical sheriff. It's very like quintessential American sheriff style to him.
Yep.
It was a fun episode.
Yep.
Well, so maybe for people that don't know you, where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah. So I'm from Utah. Grew up in West Jordan, Utah, up north. My background is my father ran an aircraft maintenance shop and a little flying club.
Oh, cool.
And I grew up around that. Soloed when I was 16 and got my private pilot's license, instrument, commercial, flight instructor license, multi-engine, and went on to get the airline transport pilots and then a mechanic too, airframe and power plant. So I kind of got all that technical training. I bring that up because it will somewhat relate to our conversation today.
Yeah.
At a very young age, and it's really paid off in a really nice career path for me. I went to SkyWest when I was 22 years old in 1992.
Nice.
And obviously a big local employer, or a regional airline, the largest regional airline in the world that was started right here in St. George.
That's right. I've been trying to get Chip Childs onto the podcast. I wanted to have a conversation with him. He's a tough guy to get a hold of.
I tell you, he would be a great guest.
I think so too.
I really think so. Yeah.
But yeah, so you started working for them at 22.
Yeah, 22. I went into maintenance initially, and I worked on the maintenance end. Back then, it was really hard to get on as a pilot, and you kind of had to get your foot in the door. And I had the mechanic training from my dad's shop. Went in as an aircraft mechanic, and then later on, about 6 years later, transitioned over to flight operations.
Cool.
And then with that, because of my maintenance background, I was a natural to move up and assist them with not only flying airplanes, but also some of their training programs. So I became a check airman, and then flight training manager, flight standards manager, and then later on the director of flight operations.
Yeah.
And retired from that job, got recruited to go to UPS. I was assistant chief pilot there, flying heavies.
Cool.
Which was really, really cool. That was a good job, but it was nights and it was Kentucky.
Yeah.
And, I do love Kentucky and the food and everything that it has to offer. I just can pull my feet out of the red sand, as they say.
Yeah.
So I took a job with Southwest Airlines, where I am now.
Nice.
I'm a pilot who goes out that way now, and I'm actively involved in the local aviation scene. I helped found the Southern Utah Aviation Association. There's 4 founding members, And we got it going, and I've since turned the reins over to others, but we helped get it going. And I have a small airplane out there. It's a small airplane. It's
Yeah.
but it's a lot of fun, and it's a unique perspective looking at St. George from there.
Yeah, we have the landscape here. I'm from the air. I have yet to do it, but I was like, man, I want to take a helicopter ride or a flight around here because it's so incredible.
Well, I'll get you set up.
That would be awesome.
I
man.
got a great little tour that I do with friends and family when they come down. It's really, really beautiful here. Stunning.
So when I was in college, well, it was in high school. I originally wanted to be an Air Force pilot.
Yeah.
And shifted my sights. Thought I was going to be an attorney. Long story short, 3 of my friends all became pilots. 2 in the Air Force and 1 in the Navy. And looking at 2 out of the 3 are now with airlines, 1 with Delta, 1 with American. And it's interesting to see like that kind of life. And I'm like, man, it's a cool thing. It's definitely on the bucket list to get my pilot's license. So
you should do it. And on that note, there's some fantastic flight training programs, flight schools.
Yeah.
One is having an open house, I believe, this weekend over at the St. George Airport.
I need to go out there and just get it going.
Yeah.
Just pull the trigger, just jump off.
Yeah. Go with me first.
Yeah,
We'll
okay.
Go, check out the local area and then see if it's something you're interested in. But yeah, a lot of big going ons in the city at large, but also at the airport.
Yeah, and there's a lot of innovation happening in the airline industry. There's lots of new technologies. There's the vertical takeoff and landing crafts, and the combination between electric and thruster engines and stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff that's happening in the industry as a whole, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and
as a mechanic, I can imagine you're just like, man, we're getting into a whole nother world here.
It's excitable. I mean, what those technologies are affording us, on city levels too, is amazing. Agricultural. Think about the drones and looking for the dry spots, and drones for fire command, and then I even spoke with John Willis yesterday, and he mentioned that they're looking at drone technology for SWAT and other technologies within the city. That it's like, wow, this is interesting tech that goes in.
It is. It's kind of scary in some ways, but I think all new technologies have that level of there's some scariness to it.
Yeah, but and I think when you think of it from a Big Brother scope, you're like, that makes you a little uncomfortable. But if you think of it like, well, we used to have helicopters that did that, right? And now you can do it much. Some cities, and maybe even this city wouldn't want to buy a helicopter. It's
very expensive.
Very expensive.
Just to fly them, just the operating costs alone, rather than maintenance and all the other stuff.
Yeah, a horrible waste of resources, I think.
Yeah.
But now drones step in, and now you got something that's a little more cost effective that practically does the same job that's been being done for many, many years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is interesting tech.
It's exciting too.
Yeah.
So how what made you jump into the political arena? I mean, what's has this been an interest of you for a long time? Have you run for office before?
Nope, I have not run for office before. And I will tell you, my involvement with the Southern Utah Aviation Association kind of opened my eyes a little bit to the politics. And, we had some changes out at the airport with leases. And we've had some things going on at the airport with not only bad leases, but runway closures, restrictions on when we can fly in and out of there. And, you start diving into it and looking into it, and you get to learn a lot about not only how the city's thinking and what they're doing, but then you start questioning some things as well.
Yeah.
I attended several meetings, city council meetings, and you just listen. And with my background being in aviation and the safety management systems that we're taught, the continuous improvement, and some of the things that we do, I look at it and I go, wow, I think this relates. And I really do think, not only for the sake of the airport and bringing some technical expertise, but I think it transitions and relates to city activities.
Yeah. And
listening to you, talking with others, including the airport manager and John Willis and Robert Myers, I feel it does relate. So I've decided to, give it a shot, get in there and say, yeah, maybe this does. Well, not maybe, it definitely does relate.
Yeah, I think it relates too. I think it's interesting to have different perspectives on the city council coming from different fields, especially, I'm a big proponent of understanding people's personality assessments because we all have certain strengths. We have, our own working geniuses, if you will. And an analytical skill set isn't the largest portion of the population. Really, being an engineer mind, it's not the biggest group, and rarely are they the ones that are going to raise their hand up and be like, "Here, I'm going to be an extrovert on top of being analytical." Those two things rarely go together, but they have a lot of value in decision making and being able to assess complex systems, which city government, state government, all these things, they're really complex. There's a lot of moving parts. And so being able to put pieces to the puzzle together, it doesn't always, I think there's a lot of representation in home builders and developers because land use is one of the big, roles of city government. But it's good to have a good mix. So I don't think you're wrong. I think it is a skill set that it translates.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about even corporate entities and how they have a board of directors, and you can look and say, okay, if you have a board of directors who's really passionate about finance and maybe employee relations, well, you'll start driving down those roads. And if you take away those operators that are familiar with operations or the designers that are the people that maybe built the foundation of the company, the company might go a different direction. Yeah. And similar with the city and the council, I believe, is that, look, it doesn't hurt to have people who are really familiar with real estate and zoning and have that PR, employee relations type of individual on there. And then I'm making a plug for myself that I think that, having analytical background where we collect data and on the airlines, obviously we have to be as safe as you possibly can. So you approach it, everything that we do from a safety perspective, and then continuous improvement perspective as well. And not to mention, because it's an airline, you want to be efficient, right?
Yeah, efficiency and effectiveness. It's like you have very thin margins of error there, right? So you have to be efficient and effective. Like those two things are paramount.
Well, you got to continually improve, right? I mean, it's good enough is never good enough. Yeah. And if you think about it, even though I know we're talking about airlines and airplanes and all that fun stuff, it very much relates and translates into city governance, corporate governance, but city governance for sure. And these are all characteristics that I believe that the city could really gain some perspective on. Yeah, and I'd like to do that.
Nice, I like that. So one of the key ways that I think voters help try to differentiate candidates one from another is understanding what makes them tick? Like what are their perspectives? Not necessarily on like, how are you going to solve the water problem? Right. And a lot of the conversations I've had so far, I've dove into, zoning and how do we deal with this issue and that issue. And the more I've thought about it, the less I think that's is helpful to the voter in being like, okay, they're going to solve. And then a lot of times it's easy to get into platitudes where you can say something without actually saying anything. Right. And so, there's a couple questions I have just to kind of get a feel for how do you think? And so what's the way that you see the role of the municipal government? Like what's the proper role for city government to take in managing the city? What's their role?
Yeah. Number one, I believe it's to make us safe, right? I mean, that's paramount. We got to have not only fire and police and emergency services, but the role of the government is the local government especially is to keep us safe. So if something's happening in my neighborhood, something's a fire or a robbery or a flood, I want to be able to call the government and get that response. Yeah. Right. And so that's always paramount in my mind. And then secondly, going back to what we were talking about, we got to be efficient. We got to be smart with how we use our resources. I know from listening to many of my neighbors, especially when they find out that you're running, that people don't want to pay a whole lot of extra taxes to pay for big things. And so then you got to say, well, you want the big thing, you don't want to pay for it. So how do you find those efficiencies?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a role of the government to, again, go find those efficiencies. And that's, in a big part, that's what the council does, right? The city council. They're the ones saying, well, that budget looks great, but where can we find cuts to pay for this or that or the other? And maybe there's a time in our future where it will require more money, but I tend to find and believe that, if we keep lean and mean, that we find innovation.
Yeah.
That's the case in most small businesses that grow.
Yeah.
You had Chris from Bonnaroo. Listen to his story. What an amazing story. And, ask him, when you roll your sleeves up, especially in the beginning, what do you get? And our city's growing. I think we're rolling our sleeves up here, especially when you talk to John Willis and Robert Meyer. Many of your guests may know the city manager and assistant city manager.
And Robert does the budget, and that's like kind of his baby.
He does. And
he's one of those analytic.
Job.
Yeah, he's one of those analytic types, and we have a good value in that guy. I think he understands accounting really well.
Yeah, great job.
And good communicator too, which back to those, being an analytical and also a good communicator, those two things are tough.
Yeah. And sometimes being a good communicator means you're a good educator, right? And so when you can get those city officials to sit up and carry on a meeting and put forth a PowerPoint that's interactive and that you can get behind, then you're educated. Yeah. Not only are you informed, but now you're educated.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference.
It does make a big difference. Yeah. How do you view the role with the local municipality and the other governmental agencies like the state and the federal agencies? Yeah. Where do you draw the lines there? And do you feel like there's good balance there? There's ebbs and flows to it, but how do you view those relationships?
Well, I think at the local level, we're the biggest experts on our local demographic, right? So when it comes to our local affairs, we should be the ones looking after them as best we can. But then the state puts down its rules, and the federal government its. Now, I would say, and I'd advocate that we need a smaller federal government and let the states do their part. And then on the local level, let's take care of our citizens as best we can locally. Now, do we have to have respect for the state laws and the federal laws? Absolutely. I mean, we absolutely have to abide by the laws, but personally, I'm in favor of less regulation, less rules, and I'm a big proponent of capitalism.
Yeah, letting the free market.
Yeah, and it usually does take care of itself. We got to put rules in place. It can't just be a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Zoning and building are good examples. I know you're more involved with that on some levels, and certainly we've got to take care of all the citizens in that sense.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance because some things I look at the city and I think the city can't solve this problem. They need the state to come in. Transportation's a big one where there's only so much in the budget, right? But it's a problem that, I played the game The Sims or SimCity when I was a kid. Yeah. And it's like if you got traffic, you had the little frowny face, everybody's getting upset when you have traffic and you have to figure out ways to, improve transportation. But that has always been across the board, every city in the country, traffic and transportation is always a key thing, yet it's a huge cost. It's a huge cost. And it doesn't make money. It never makes money. Public transportation doesn't make money. And so you can get close to kind of breaking even in some cases, but it's always an ever-growing challenge, especially as cities grow. And so it's difficult because it's like, the city can only solve so many problems where the state needs to come in, and then the federal government,
that's a great point. And, when we talk on the federal level, we're protecting that interstate commerce, right? And locally too, I think of the airports and where we get money for our local airport. And I know many of our city roads are the same, particularly if they, interconnect through interstate or, federally across the nation. You get that funding, that helps make the difference. So, the local airport, for example, they're bringing in some $319 million. I think that was the latest number I had was $319 million in revenue last year in 2014, estimated, and some 36,000 employments that are equaling tourist taxation dollars and To say though that there is an opportunity to bring money in with transport, and I think that goes with our streets. If they're congested and small, are we attracting that tourism that we want? You know, and how do we get that flow of not only for our citizens move around, but also for our guests?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I've talked about this on a couple other episodes too. Is we've built our economy around tourism that was set forth long before us, right? If you go back to the 70s, I-15 comes through. How do we build a community that's not a wide spot in the road? How do we drive? Tourism was a big driver of that because we have so many things to offer. Excuse me. And so now we're at a point to where we don't want to just because there's the quality of life issue for the people that do live here, right? Is that how do we balance that economic driver that has grown us to this point to now where we want to improve the quality of life for the big population that we do have here, right? And so we're in this transition point again, right? And it's a difficult thing to do. So this actually brings me to another question. So when you're faced with like a divisive issue, right? How do you prioritize your own personal convictions versus the majority of opinion of your constituents, right? Is that you might have, and it might even be the feeling of a majority opinion, but how do you balance those priorities between what you really believe and then what potentially the opinion is of the crowd at large?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And years of management experience, particularly in the airlines and listening to the employees as well as the upper level, you got to really learn to listen, right? Mm-hmm. And while we do some good in communicating, the city's putting out all kinds of initiatives to educate and communicate. I believe we need to listen. And that doesn't mean just pick up the phone and listen. That means let's put out a survey. Mm-hmm. Let's collect some data. Let's collect, it is a survey, but it also, might be how does the training go for an event or for city officials, and what kind of data can we extract from that? And what we need to do is we need to look at what we're hearing in the surveys, what we're hearing from the people, and we need to come up with real answers. Mm-hmm. So it's easy. I was frustrated when we went to city council meetings, and the first working meeting, you're not really allowed to talk, and so you can sit there and you can shake your head or you can nod, but it's not an open dialogue.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting it should be. Otherwise, I'm sure these meetings don't get done at all. But there should be an opportunity on hot issues or things that require expert advice that these people should be called up. And then furthermore, maybe surveys need to be sent to, local area residents or tenants or whomever the new policy is going to affect so that we can better collect that data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's a tough thing to do, right? And then having that once you're listening, balancing. Okay, maybe I disagree. When those decisions arise, how do you? When do you decide to stand firmly on your principles in the face of what might not be a popular decision? Like how, when is it acceptable for you to be like, well, my opinion doesn't necessarily matter as much as the people I'm representing? How do you plan on weighing that out?
Yeah, I think you got to take all the information. You got to do that listening that we're talking about, and then ultimately you're going to have to make a decision. It's kind of like the captain of a ship. You mm-hmm. don't run into the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
Sooner or later, you got to make that decision to move, and get the right information. Get as much of the right information you can. Make a real knowledgeable decision. And then you got to go with it. Yeah. Now, I will say that what I've learned, and not only in our local community but also in industry, is that there's a squeaky wheel on both sides. There's the 1% on either side, and those individuals they talk really loud and they can get really really upset, but they don't normally speak for the majority. Right. The majority are a little bit more moderate in nature and mm-hmm. are willing to. Make those some concessions to get some things. So I think you got to approach it from a moderate perspective.
Yeah, I got you. That makes sense. Okay, let's shift to some economics here. So, what's your perspective on the role of the economic growth in the community's well-being, and how does it compare to other priorities like quality of life and cultural preservation? Because we live in a community where a large percentage of the community doesn't necessarily want us to change. They like the status quo. It's like, I moved here and now I want to close the door behind me. I hear that all the time. So how do things like, the role of economic growth and that never-ending change that occurs, how do you balance those two things? How does it compare to those priorities, quality of life, cultural preservation and economic growth? Where do you set those?
That's a great question because, I know you moved here, I moved here because we love what we have. We love the culture. We love the outdoor activities and the open spaces. And, when particularly our long-term residents, I've lived here once before between 97 and 99. And boy, it was a considerably different city even then. So we move here and we want our cake and eat it too. So I'd love to say, I'd love it to be the way it was, how it was when I moved here. But I got an 18-year-old daughter who I'd also love to see live here. And so then you got to ask yourself, how do we balance that growth so that they can get their cake and eat it too, right?
Yeah.
And so that I think has to come through smart city governance, and we're going to have to, that's where you want to talk about how we zone things. Are we going to go with some medium density of homes, perhaps in a downtown area, and how do we really try to control inventory, or do we just try to what I mean by that is, short-term rentals and whatnot, secondary homes, they tie up a lot of the inventory that's in the market. But we're also seeing that there's a little bit of a stagnation in the market right now. It's not necessarily translating into cheaper homes,
right?
Interest rates, whatnot. So, I think what we really need to do is we need to provide what we can in the sense of auxiliary dwelling units and medium density homes. We need greenways, green space, so that as we build, that we preserve those parks, those walkways, those things that attracted us to the area. So it's going to be a balance. There's no doubt. We need to educate our kids, and we need to tie them into Utah Tech and Dixie Tech, and give them the opportunities to get those higher paying jobs so that they can afford these homes that just don't seem to be coming down in price.
Yeah. It's a tough one. And that's where, going back to, specifically, I think what I was talking about, and maybe here's more of an example, the city, and I actually talked to the economic development department of the city, and there was an incentive given to Costco to come into Desert Color, right? And so there was money given by the city to incentivize Costco to come here, and they weigh out the balance and they say, this is our projected revenue from this massive, company that's going to drive tons of sales, and the sales tax is going to go directly to the city, right? These are huge economic incentives for a city to allow for housing types, because when you have to have that balance between housing and actual businesses, right? So they economically incentivize businesses to come here. Where do you draw that line? Do you think that's the proper role? Does that fit into that proper role of the local government to say, hey, I'm going to do whatever I can to incentivize those economic growth? Or do you think it's a little bit of a back to the free market and say, hey, we're going to set the table, set the rules. We don't need to put our hand on the scale one side or the other. Where do you kind of fit in that? I'm
a big fan of the capitalism and the open market, but I also believe that there, for our children's sake and for our base population's sake, that if we do incentivize, it needs to be smart. It needs to be in tech. It needs to be in aerospace. It needs to be in robotics. It needs to be in things that we can preserve our feel and our look of our city, and preserve our home pricing. And I mean, you don't have to look too far back. Las Vegas, not long ago, back in 2008, well, during the housing boom and bust, they did a lot of that rapid expansion out. And then when the economy turned around, it was desolate. There were empty homes everywhere, tumbleweeds blowing through developments. Yeah. We don't want that either.
Right.
So we got to attract the right crowd into, and we need to provide, opportunities for our children.
Yeah. Along these same lines, let's look, how do you weigh out the economic growth versus the environmental side of things. You know, it's definitely a topic of conversation here because we have a federal law that basically says if we don't protect the desert tortoise, we can't develop anything. There's no permits for anything that can be passed unless we are doing, in the eyes of the federal government, enough to protect the desert tortoise. And so when we think of, you know, acceptable, is it ever acceptable for the local government to prioritize economic growth over that environment? Where do you land on those, the balance of those two things?
Well, I mean, obviously moving down here because you love the environment and you love the surrounding areas and, you know, and the wildlife included, you know, you want those protections as well. So it has to be balanced, it has to be smart. Engineers might need to get involved and find ways that both can exist. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I lean toward, we don't want to sprawl out everywhere mm-hmm. and give up what makes St. George unique in what it is. So I think we got to strike that balance. If we do expand into those areas, let's do it wisely. Let's do it. Let's see how engineering and how we can blend the two to work. You know, we talked about I think you talked about in one of your podcasts, or someone was telling me there's so much concrete in the downtown area. How much of that water makes it into the ground? Yeah, you know, and there's some real issues there. So what can we do well, that's where we get into, tech perhaps and better engineering solutions that allow us to have that cake and eat it too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough one too. The thing that comes to mind is the Northern Corridor. Yeah. And that's the big one where you have environmental groups, a part of it is local based. There's a big movement and a big push to protect at the local side, but a lot of it comes from outside the area too. A lot of the money that comes against that environmental to conserve the environment in these outlying areas. You know, it's a tough balance because you have SITLA, and I covered this extensively. I talked to SITLA, talked to Conserve Southwest Utah, I talked to the county attorneys. We talked about all these things and how they balance out. And so it's a tough balance between that economic growth, what's the mandate of SITLA, but then also at the same time, it's, you know, are we just going to pay paradise in that way? And it's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, and don't forget, the Bluff, the Boulevard, they're pretty darn crowded, and when you're moving across town, you're sprawling at both ends. It would be nice to have some connection in between the two, as long as it's responsible. Though I do think that, you know, if you do provide a road, I wish I could remember the name of the freeway they built up in Salt Lake along the Great Salt Lake. I'm forgetting it right now. Forgive me. I've been down here for a while.
That's okay.
But they did they found ways to strike balance between the environment and the wetlands that are there. Yeah. And still connect to the north end of the valley. And that might be what we're looking at here. We might have to find a way to connect and balance those environmental issues.
Can we do the two things? And I think we can. I think we can do both things. And I think it's an interesting shift where you think the conservative idea used to be the environmentalist. It used to be, the right side of the aisle, right? You can call it conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, whatever, because they used to mean the other thing. They used to be opposite. Now they're opposite again. But the whole idea is that a conservative idea is to protect nature. Yep. You know, it isn't this unabashed, constant growth. And so I think most people want both things. And I think there is a balance between the two, but it's really tough to
strike between those two ends.
Strike between the two ends.
Because you got the squeaky wheels on each side and, but we got to find a balance.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. This is actually a good transition to this question. Do you believe that ethical leadership requires absolute consistency in decision-making, or is flexibility more important?
Oh, I believe you got to be flexible. And that goes back to the conversations that we're having is that, we've got to listen to the, whatever topic is in front of us, whatever's in front of us, we got to listen to both sides of the argument, and we got to come up with what's right for the community and at large. When I don't know if you have a specific example in mind. I don't know. Are you?
Well, so because when I think of when I look at the two extremes, what I see is there's this expectation of consistency. Is like, you said this thing this one time, you believe in this thing this one time, and then you're a flip flopper, right? And so but then on the one side you're like, Well, he's consistently making bad decisions, or he's consistently, one direction, and he's unwavering on that. But is ethical leadership being fully consistent, or does it take being able to stand up and say, I was probably wrong on that thing, and I'm okay with that, which politicians are not great at saying I was wrong on that.
Well, I would hope we evolve, right?
Yeah.
I mean, should I be elected, I'll be, brand new to the job. You're going to learn an awful lot. You might campaign on one thing, and your eyes are going to open to another.
Yeah.
And, and as is the case in business or almost anything, even, look at marriage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we evolve.
Yeah.
And so I would hope that, and I will be the guy that would likely be the one who evolves. And, while I have some pretty core values conservatively, you got to listen. You got to listen.
Yeah, it's an important thing. I think it's okay to be wrong as a politician.
Yes,
I think it's okay to be wrong, especially if you're honest about it. And that's where like the ethical leadership is like, what is ethical leadership? Is that ability to turn around and be like, you know what, I wasn't really good at that, And I've heard even with the current city council is that there's been a bunch of examples where somebody took one side, and I'll use this example as the budget early on. They voted for a tax increase in St. George. And by the time public comment came out, it had fully flipped. It went from 4 and 1 against to 4 against and 1 for. And it's interesting to see that there is that ebb and flow even on the current city council. And it's something that I would like to continue to see, because I think having a balanced perspective, lots of different viewpoints, lots of different personality traits, and that ability to have, not having to just stay consistent just for the sake of I'm this one way and I'm going to stay that course.
Commend the 4 on listening.
Yeah.
So, and the 1 for maybe speaking truth to the full power.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I commend them for doing that, and I'd encourage them to keep doing it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I agree. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. Here's my last one.
Okay.
So it's probably the one that I've asked everybody. What's your viewpoint on term limits? Do you think there's value in it at the municipal side? Maybe what are your thoughts on it at the state and federal level?
Well, that's a fair question.
Maybe you haven't thought about it at all.
I hadn't really thought about it, but it's a good question, because I appreciate fresh viewpoints and fresh values, and getting someone in there who can shed new light, and that's always important. But there's really something to be said for, I'm right in the middle of this project. I've 4 years we've done some remarkable things. I want to continue doing that. And, I'm saying this, I know I'm fully aware I'm running against 2 incumbents.
Yeah.
But my viewpoint in this arena and this day is that I think we could use some fresh perspective and some technical assistance in the fold. And I think both incumbents are wonderful people. And, I think that they've done a good job, and they've served really well. I just think that the 5 could use some technical assistance, some different vantage points, and I think what I can bring to the table would assist in doing that.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. Think you're wrong. If there was a term limit, what do you think? How many? If you were to how many terms would be enough to be what, that was a good long stretch. If you get 4 years a term, how many terms?
Yeah, I just hate to say myself. I wouldn't want to really go much more than 2. I don't think
8 years. Is a long time.
Eight's a long time. But there are some really popular politicians that people hate to see go, and they've done wonderful things and wonderful jobs. So I don't have a direct answer to that. I'm going to have to think on that. But myself personally, I think 1 to 2 terms would be plenty fine for me.
Yeah.
But a nice contribution to our city, and but
it's something the reason I asked the question is because it's something that I want the community to really wrestle with.
Yeah.
Because I think it's never going to happen at the top.
Yeah.
I think if you look at the fundamentals of a system where lobbying interests, personal interests, things like that, especially over long periods of time, they can't be connected. They end up being completely connected to each other, right? Those personal interests. And so when I think about how long is long enough, and then the idea, like you said, is that fresh perspective, is that the job can be done by lots of different people, and incumbents win 80% of the time. 80% of the time. So if I'm a lobbyist and I have money, and I'm going to put my money on a horse, the one that's got an 80% chance of winning is probably going to be the one that gets the money. And then what does that buy? What influence does that buy? And over time, it wears on politicians. And I don't think it's going to start from the top, but I think if a community at a local level can see it operate in a positive way, they're going to start to see that demand and calling for that to happen at the higher levels. And so I'm a big proponent of term limits, but I don't think it's going to start from the top. I think it has to start at the local level, and I don't know if very many people agree with me.
Well, and
at least politicians. They typically don't.
Getting your perspective is enlightening, and it does bring up a great point. Like right now we don't have a district system for what I'm running for city council, and it is difficult because the population has grown. We got 110,000 people in the city, and trying to reach them on a limited campaign, and I'm putting a lot of my own money into it because I'm sincere about it. I'm willing to do that, but to a limit, right? I mean, you don't want to run for broke either, and so that's a great perspective, but also breaking it up a little bit to make it a little bit more fair, so I can talk to my
you
neighbors.
Can hone in on the
people who know me
exactly
might actually,
and then who you would actually represent is like, hey, this is my my viewpoint is this part of town, and this person's viewpoint is this part of town. And there's some challenges with the districting because now it might
overlook one side.
It might overlook one side or the other side. I can see there's some pros and cons to the districting, and our community, we're still kind of a small town community. We still have that feel. So I don't know if we're quite there yet on the districting, but anyway, well, Shane Losee.
Shane Losee. Yes.
Tell everybody where they can find more information about you.
Yeah, appreciate that. Shane Losee, LOSEE.com. ShaneLosee.com.
And I think we'll have the link in the video description here. And then they can also go to votestg.com. You can find all the list of the candidates. St. George is already all loaded up. His survey answers are already loaded up there. We'll get the video posted there soon. But you can go to one website, votestg.com, and find all the candidates for Ivan, Santa Clara, St. George, Washington City, and Hurricane City. Sorry, Leeds, Laverkin. Just hang with me. We'll get everybody eventually. But those 5 cities, you'll have all the candidates in one spot. They'll answer survey questions, or you'll see if they don't, which might tell you a little bit of something about them. And then you'll have the interview linked right there. So you won't have to go scouring the internet for information. You go to one spot, but definitely check out his campaign website will be there as well. They'll have a button for your campaign website, get to know you a little more, but good luck, man.
All right. Well, I really appreciate
I think you're going to do well.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Make a good run at it. All right, guys. We'll see you out there, everybody. Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.